On this episode of the SoundWorks Collection podcast, we're diving into Netflix's gripping thriller Woman of the Hour, directed by the multitalented Anna Kendrick in her remarkable directorial debut. Joining us today are Director Anna Kendrick, re-recording mixer Tony Solis, and supervising sound editor Paul Stanley. We'll explore how these creative minds collaborated to heighten the tension and intensity of the film through sound, and break down a few key scenes that offer fascinating insights into the filmmaking process. The cold opening to me is, whenever there's a cold open, I'm so excited to see what's going to happen. And in this case, we're establishing it's Wyoming, 1977. And this character of Sarah, we don't yet know what the context is with Rodney. There's this fantastic VO perspective from Rodney looking down at the viewfinder of the camera. What was it that you could tell from script phases to when you got to working with Tony and Paul that you wanted to establish with tone in terms of introducing Rodney and obviously Sarah?
Well, before we even hear Rodney, let's be clear, it was important to me that that the world of these women feel like there's a big duality in there. And, I did try to do that visually, but sonically there's, all of these lovely morning chirping birds and, rustling wind. And it really is meant to be the most beautiful kind of soundscape that you could imagine, and really kind of set you at ease. And then I think Paul might know better than me, but before we hear Rodney's voice, we hear one lone coyote. And it's just kind of meant to plant that seed. And as the scene goes on, it's almost like every little insect, every bird, every animal that you hear starts to the percentages start to shift, where now it's, mostly coyotes, and it's the kind of insects that if you heard them, you'd kind of move away from that area. And all those sweet, lovely, delightful chirping birds are nowhere to be heard. So, the sound was just as important. I mean, obviously, as the visuals or anything else we were doing, and even in a larger scale, I always said, during pre-production, it was clearly we're this tiny movie masquerading as a big movie. The movie is very ambitious for the time and the resources that we had. And so I knew a lot of the storytelling was going to really rely on sound. So I had a big emotional ask of the sound team. And, yeah, I'm very, very happy that not only are they proficient technicians, but they really were emotionally invested in the film and, creating all of those emotional landscapes.
With that being said, Paul, what do you remember in terms of creating tone of these kind of sound motifs with the coyotes, with the winds? I mean, we'll talk about it in a few of those scenes. You guys are very the dynamics of when things really go silent, the background drops out and you're okay, it's very naked now. This is feeling very, very intimidating. But what can you say about that opening scene, Paul, with just developing kind of a soundscape that you start to return to as we visit these different locations?
After speaking to Anna, it was very important to me that we feel the isolation of the area and the loneliness of it too. So we were specifically targeting winds, and I should say UC Tableman was targeting winds. He was the sound designer on the show, but we had lots of conversations. And the insect types, cicadas, as Anna has already mentioned, they ramp up to this aggressive kind of cacophony as the assault takes place. But also with the coyotes, I kind of had the idea that coyotes, when they sense another predator is around, they start to make this yipping sound that you hear. So that becomes more integrated into the soundtrack as the assault continues and as it peters out too. So, it was just important to have those things come together, to really not elevate, but just support what we were seeing in picture, because it's such an emotional scene as well. It's such a hard scene to watch. And without being overt really in any way to draw attention to what we were doing, it wasn't a look at us moment. It was just something to support what Anna had captured already and what, those incredible performances the actors were giving. So,
Tony, what can you say about dynamics? I feel like being quiet sometimes feels like, how quiet can we get? What's the delicate balance? How would you describe finding your way through this opening scene?
I needed to watch most of the movie to really understand the tones that were being created throughout the film. So I could see, how should we get the audience to understand that we're going to be using silence here and there without people thinking that something's missing, there's an error or some quality control issue or whatever. And after kind of going through the full movie, and the beginning actually used to be a lot bigger with ambiances. And I felt, and us as a whole unit felt that like starting the movie in almost silence was the way to sort of start to lead into getting the audience used to this sort of level and getting used to us steering what you're supposed to hear, what you're not supposed to hear, what you can hear. And, we have the beautiful birds, we have the coyotes, we have all that building up slowly. And one of the biggest moments for me is right when Rodney is about to chase her, that we switch over to the car. And I remember, if you remember, Anna, that we had a version where we heard them yelling, or we heard her yelling really far away. And I think like we came to a consensus that it's just like, no, let's just not hear anything, because that's so much more desolate and much more like anxiety filling to not hear her, even though you see her, you don't hear that struggle. So yeah, she's alone. No one's going to help her. No one's going to save her. And that's already sort of like that vibe that we were building of desolation and solitude. And at that point, using the cold open as a way to sort of teach the audience how this movie is going to go sonically, I thought was sort of perfect. And how it kind of builds, how it ends, how hardcore the actual struggle is. Like we mixed it louder, we mixed it a little bit back, and we found a happy medium there. And it just set the tone. I was fortunate enough to meet that actress last week, and I told her, I'm like, thank you so much, because you basically set the tone in my brain of how I wanted to approach the rest of the movie. And it sort of led to this great collaboration with everyone on the stage.
And we can talk about that. I mean, just the characters of Sarah, Amy, and Charlie. I mean, Kelly Jackal, Autumn Best, Catherine Gallagher. I mean, home runs across the board. But like, and Tony, I think, him and I were talking about this, like, they haven't been in so many, in a handful of films, but how did you go about?
And it's Autumn's first movie. And eventually we should talk about how she came in and crushed ADR in a way that I found personally humiliating, because how dare she be that good at ADR in her first movie?
I mean, what's your take on ADR? How do you like ADR?
I mean, ADR is a necessary evil in the industry. I think I've gotten pretty good at it, but it's taken me 20 years. It's a very different thing when all these girls show up. And I mean, the other thing is that I totally by accident hired all musicians, so that helped a lot in a lot of ways, but particularly ADR. Nicolette, who plays Laura, the girl in the audience, and all of the actresses you just named, they were amazing. They were putting me to shame because they've really got that ear for it.
We had 85 lines for Anna to, I won't say knock out, because that really diminishes what she does. But we had those lines covered, and I mean covered, completely covered, in 50 minutes. Just think about that. 50 minutes, 85 lines. So, I mean, yeah, okay, the other actors were incredible, Autumn in particular. But yeah, Anna's definitely underselling herself.
I mean, I'm glad you bring up just ADR. I mean, there's so many things I want to get to, but because there is so much off-camera dialogue, use of sound, obviously we don't see the brutality of these murders, but we hear them, which is, I mean, as
worse.
worse.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. I mean, it's just the sound, your mind is left to imagine what's happening. Jumping ahead a little bit, when we get to the dating game show and we are introduced to Tony Hale, as the MC of the show and the makeup artist pre-show conversations.
Hey, camera, get ready for the snap zone.
Hi, Cheryl. Pleased to make your pleasure.
Pleasure to meet your.
Save that talk for the date.
Pleasure to make your acquaintance.
There we go. Third time's a charm. Bachelor number 2.
Hello, Cheryl.
Hello. If you want to groove, pick number 2.
God, is it stuck like that?
We'll have to find out.
And would you please say hello to Cheryl, Bachelor number 3.
Lights up on number 3.
We're going to have a great time together, Cheryl.
Oh, he's confident. Well, now that you know what they sound like, are you ready to take it to the next step?
I think I am.
Do you have your questions set?
Sure do.
All right, let's take a seat, make yourself comfortable, and here we go.
There's a very conscious decision to take the perspective of Cheryl from the stage. Was that on page? Is that how you imagined it? Is that what you figured out on set? Like, how did it evolve? And then how did you emphasize that when you got to the mix stage?
It always seemed to me like it was on the page, but it was funny when I was working with the cinematographer, Zach Cooperstein, as we were shotlisting things. It was also, this maybe isn't the area of this venue, but there was also kind of a tricky thing where he was sort of, going through potential shots, and I kept thinking, like, I really think that the majority of this scene plays on Cheryl's face, but it is complicated when you're going, well, that's my face. So that seems incredibly self-serving. But I do think that it's almost like sometimes when you have a character who's really in many ways meant to be the audience's window into the world, you can actually almost prop up those other performances more by seeing the audience representatives' reaction to them. Like if I'd literally put the hair and makeup girls like physically, literally on camera more, I think you almost would have gotten to know them less, because it really is about getting Cheryl's perspective on like, oh, I feel so kind of safe and warm suddenly because there's these two really energetic, really nurturing hair and makeup girls, and just establishing how that makes Cheryl feel makes you really love them. And then we can really focus on their faces a little later in the film when they're imparting wisdom to me.
So, who are you gonna pick? Oh, knock it off. What? I'm just asking.
Do you think I went too far?
I think he thinks you went too far.
He thinks everything is too far.
Yeah, but do you though?
Honey, I've been on this show since 1968, and I've seen more idiots flirting back and forth than I can count. The one thing I've learned is, no matter what words they use, the question beneath the question remains the same.
All right. What's the question?
Which one of you will hurt me? You just asked it clearer than most.
There's a point where Cheryl is in what we were lovingly referring to as the isolation booth. And yet, it's meant to have that kind of claustrophobic feeling of like, oh my God, I'm completely isolated. I'm trapped in this box. I feel kind of claustrophobic. And yet I'm hearing the echoes of what I'm about to step into. It's almost like a gladiator moment.
Yeah. Tony and Paul, can you talk about building that world of the game show? Because you're playing perspectives. We're cutting in and out of commercial breaks. We're cutting to the perspective on screen, like in the control room. And it's all done in a way that just feels like we're living in this very like you said, Anna, like in this claustrophobic world. How did you work? I mean, I would say like kudos to Andy Canny, your editor, because I felt like we never felt disjointed. We always felt like we're in that and the audience is kind of like looking down on them. Like, oh, this is so fun, yet it's so terrifying. But I tortured these guys about laughter and applause. It was like we went over and over and over every single piece of
applause or laughing, because the show kind of starts to go wrong. So it's not like you can just pick 3 kind of canned pieces of applause and laughter and call it a day. It's like there's uncomfortable laughter. There's, half the audience is laughing genuinely and half the audience is laughing nervously. And again, because we were this little movie, I had one day with an audience, but we shot that sequence for 5 or 6 days, I think. So, I, again, really needed to rely on the sound team to help me see, stitch together the feeling that we had that 100-person audience for the entire time.
Yeah. Paul, what would you say was the glue for the game show? What really helped kind of get you into that environment and play the perspective for Cheryl? Firstly,
the incredible group we had. And, we were fortunate enough to record group for 3 days because we needed the coverage. And Anna was there for every single moment of that. It's one of the few times I've had a director sit with me in group and actually direct the group. Usually it's you've got this covered, I'll see you later kind of thing. And this was the first time that, someone had actually sat with me and directed the group for each cue. So it was that was very refreshing. And I think because of that, we ended up getting the exact pieces of material we needed to shape those crowds, because we covered a lot. We worked those guys really, really hard, and they were terrific. So that was a huge part of it. The second part of it was when Tony and I first started to address it on the mix stage. And we realized what we had got here, and obviously this is a movie of POVs, and we have a lot of perspectives cutting back and forth. As you say, tremendous cut, picture cut. So we dove into that and kind of, in our pre-dub, and kind of roughed in how we felt it should start to feel. And then the third part was when Anna got to the stage, we then dove into it full, up to our necks. And then as Anna was saying, we were going through every take. We were finding the pieces that were correct for the moments, emotionally. So I think that was a huge part of making that stage feel the way it did. Other than the perspective cuts back to the booth and the audience. And once again, we were fortunate there because Anna has the perspective of being in a talk show situation. So she knows how the audience should feel from her position. And that was enormously informative to us, because I've not been in that position before.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was a huge part of it. So she was like, "Oh no, it shouldn't be quiet. I mean, you can hear them. You can hear the chatter really clearly." So that was very informative to us, and all of it. And I'll let Tony, talk about his approach to it. But it took a minute to get there. We definitely went through different iterations, different treatments of reverbs. And yes, Tony can speak much more precisely to that.
I was curious, Tony, what are the production tracks like for, a closed set when it's meant to be a TV show? How do they approach it?
The production stuff that I got was pretty minimal for the audience. I had a few little bits and pieces. It was mostly very, lavs and the mics on all the actors, which was great to have. But almost every single part of the game show itself was a group. And I remember Paul calling me being like, "I'm sorry, you're going to have like 48 plus tracks of group. And we're going to have to go through all of it just to make sure," because it was just broad coverage. And then we were going to go in during the pre-dub and start to shape it all out. And then once Anna had come in, we kind of picked a part of a day, or if not a full day. And it was reels 2, 3, and 4 that we just went in, kind of muted everything except the group and the dialogue, and just sort of shaped it. And to the credit of like understanding what that feels like, I've been in LA for a long time, and I've gone to tapings of like Conan and like Tonight Show and stuff like that when it was Jay Leno. And I remember like the feel of the room. It's like a very weird kind of like buzz, and I know what what people on the stage sound like. They're kind of super far away, and we had to start making all these choices about how are we supposed to be hearing the people on stage talking? Are we in the perspective of what? And we made a pretty conscious choice about when we're with Cheryl, we're in the perspective of Cheryl. When we're with Rodney, we're kind of in Rodney's perspective, and so on.
All right, folks, everyone in place.
Get the stuff in here.
That's enough. Come on, let's get out here. Let's move this chair. Get up, Cheryl. We've had an entire commercial break to get rid of this. Come on, go. Here, you right there.
And 5,
Go.
3,
Boys are babies, right?
Welcome back to the dating game. Cheryl, you have played this game beautifully, but now it is time to make a decision. Our bachelors were cool, candid, sharp, and patient, but only one of them can get the date. Will it be bachelor number 1, bachelor number 2, or bachelor number 3? Cheryl, who is the lucky guy?
Number 3.
Number 3. My. And let me ask you, Cheryl, what about number 3 appealed to you the most?
He knows what girls are for.
He knows what girls are for.
But as far as the group went, it was about kind of thinning it out to feel incredibly real. And, great reverb usage that we kind of did, the different types of group that I kind of layered it in 3 groups of like call outs, a very specific kind of murmuring, and then the more cheery stuff. And all of that was treated very differently because we would go in and out of all of it. And it was a lot of work for sure. Like it was probably the most work I've ever put into group mixing, but it worked because when we saw it at the Egyptian on October 10th, it just blended into that room. And I'm like, there we go. It sounded like the people in our room at that point.
I know there really were times during the premiere where I was like, I can't even tell if we're getting a big laugh or if that's the audience laughter. Because usually for most of the movie, it's the opposite. It's like when the dating game audience is a little uncomfortable, the viewing audience is laughing. But there's like one section when Cheryl kind of rebels and like takes the show into her own hands where the dating game audience and hopefully the viewing audience are aligned. And it was kind of really electrifying to be like, oh my gosh, everybody's laughing at like almost the exact same, like in the same way and at the same decibel as our, film audience. It was so cool. Bachelor number 1. This is nice and easy. What are girls for?
What do you mean?
Just what I said. What are girls for?
Geez, you're getting edgy with this one.
Oh, do you want to go back to Immanuel Kant?
No. I can do this.
Good to hear it. I believe in you, Bachelor number 1.
Thank you. Girls are for guys and, having fun with.
Well, Gloria Steinem would be proud.
Being a little hard on the boys, aren't you, Cheryl?
Oh, I think we're all having fun.
Of course we are.
Aren't we having fun? See? We're having so much fun.
The nuance that you guys have, and Anna, I mean, I just want to give you full kudos. I have a sense that there are things on the page that you guys lean into, and I want to find out if this is true, especially when you guys, after the game show, you guys, Rodney and Cheryl go out for drinks, and there's this line, I thought it looked normal from the outside, and then I wrote down the bar wallet drops out.
Yeah.
And then his question of, did you feel seen?
Yes. I'll say that, like, I'm tempted to say, oh, this is the most frequent thing that people mention to me about the sound. But actually, people who aren't interested enough to make comments about the sound will call out this moment, which makes me so happy.
Was that intended? Is that what you meant to do?
Yeah. So even when Paul's talking about that idea of isolation, there's almost something that I brought forward to the sound team when we all met for the first time, and I even mentioned it to the composers. It's something that I wanted to really try to capture, that there is a moment, and I think we've probably all experienced it at one point, but certainly it's something that I know that women will relate to. The moment when there's this 10-second period where you go, wait, 10 seconds ago, I thought everything was fine. And I don't know what's happening now. And I feel really unsafe. And I couldn't describe to you after the fact what happened, but I know that some threat is now hanging in the air. And there's almost this heightened sensory experience where, visually, it's like you're suddenly really aware of your peripheral vision, which is why frequently when that happens, the camera jumps wide. But also it is almost like suddenly all the blood kind of rushes to your ears and you're just listening for like, can I hear anything that would save me? Can I hear someone arguing 2 blocks away? Can I hear a maintenance man coming around the corner? Or am I totally screwed? I could scream as loud as I could and no one would hear me.
Most people don't like to be seen. They're afraid. Because you have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to stop performing. I never hide who I am. Excuse me, ma'am. Can you give us another round? We had the Mai Tais.
Sorry, you missed last call. We're just closing up.
It's a shame.
Well, I guess we'll have to get out of here then, huh?
Yeah. Even though we're in a bar, it felt important to create that experience because I think that is still kind of your internal experience, is almost like all the air gets sucked out of the room or all the sound gets sucked out of the room. And one of my favorite things is that we drop out the music and the bar walla really, really slowly, like so slowly that nobody notices. And what I find so fascinating, and I love it, is that so many people describe that moment to me as, oh, I love that moment in the bar when they're just chatting and everything's fine. And then suddenly all the sound drops out. And that's not what happens, but it is what you experience. Because you're suddenly, like Cheryl, aware that, oh, that loud trio of kind of, boisterous, drunk folks, they left. And I don't hear anybody in this bar. There's maybe one barfly down at the end of the bar that, wouldn't be able to help me if he wanted to. And certainly he doesn't. So I might as well be in an isolated parking lot or a hilltop, just like Sarah at the beginning of the film. And there was one producer who came to the sound mix and after the movie ended, gave a note that was like, hey, something happens in the bar scene where it just suddenly feels like there's nobody in there. And I went, well done us. Mission accomplished us. And it is funny. There's a lot of things. I've noticed that there's a lot of things as you're putting a movie together that people will call out as potentially a mistake. But once it's in a finished movie and you at least know, like, I'm committing to this is the intention, where people will really go with it. But while you're putting it together, it gets kind of flagged as like, hey, just so you know, you can't actually really see what's happening in that shot, or you can't really hear what's happening in that moment. And you're like, yeah, that's the idea. And if anything, I was so grateful to this team for so many reasons, but because this is certainly an area of deficit for me, I don't know anything about, audio design or anything like that they were willing to do things a little bit the kind of quote wrong way because, we believed that it could be really interesting.
I'm happy to hear that was the intention because I felt it and I was like, okay, it's getting really, I thought it was creepy. Now it's getting really creepy. And then from the rest of the movie on, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And the one thing that I want to ask you guys is, the scene, just taking us to a next scene here with this parking lot conversation, this tracking shot, the breathing, the footsteps, they're getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
Hey.
You told me your number?
I just gave it to you.
Yeah, no, I know. I just want to make sure I have the right one. Sometimes the 4s, they kind of look like 9s.
Right. Yeah, just let me see it and
Can't repeat it from memory? So I guess this means we're not really meeting up in Carmel anymore?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere with you.
All right. Fair enough. Maybe I'll see you around.
Yeah, maybe.
You get your fucking head bashed in.
What?
We were very intentional with everything that we were doing, be it silence and stuff like that. That's why, like, big picture stuff, we were teaching the audience that silence was going to be used, and don't treat it as some kind of weird error or anything like that. And so the bar scene was the end of Reel 4, and the parking lot was the beginning of Reel 5. So we actually had a split there. And I remember treating those two scenes mentally as two different planets. And they were just, I didn't really experience it all together, and noticing like how much anxiety we build up even more. But the parking lot scene was a great example of like how we thinned stuff out to create that desolation that Anna's character, that Cheryl was feeling, because, you know, I had conversations with my fiance about she saw the scene during the pre-dub and was just like, every woman that walks alone in the dark knows exactly what that feels like. And she kind of like put it into my brain about how the world kind of closes in around you and feels like that. And you get very selective listening because of it. And I remember we were treating that scene of the specific footsteps that we had. We used the production footsteps because they were gorgeous sounding.
Great shoes.
Yeah, they were amazing shoes. The floor was just the right amount of wet that it gave it this perfectly gritty heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. You know, UC and Maverick mixed those beautifully into the movie. And it was about sort of, I think we had many conversations about the levels of the dialogue, about what Rodney says, and about like, do we want to hear it? Do we not want to hear it?
Yes.
And we were back and forth on that so much about.
I know we dragged in other employees at the studio. I was like, will you come in here? I know you don't know anything about the movie and you have no context, but we were debating over like, what, 1 dB? I mean, literally.
It was ever so like, do we need to understand what Rodney says in that moment? Or are people going to be so leaned in that no matter how low we put it, people are going to hear exactly what he says?
And I really did want it to be right on that edge, because again, that is the experience sometimes when you're in a situation where you suddenly feel very unsafe. You go, wait, is there a dangerous look in that person's face, or am I imagining it? Did they just say that? Like, I always kind of secretly knew I was going to play that line on my back. And that when we cut back to Danny, he would be kind of looking at the floor and then just look up at me and smile as though he hadn't said anything at all. And then I'm left with, well, God, if he said what I think he said, I should run. But if he didn't, maybe I'm paranoid and maybe he's just kind of a creep. And, you know, hearing just the B and the word bash and the, you know, the kind of CK in the F word, and, you know, just going like, no, surely he didn't just say that. Like, surely.
You get your fucking head bashed in.
What?
I think it was scripted as though we were like shaking hands goodnight and he just said it to my face. And I was like, I really think it's scarier if Cheryl is and the audience is not totally sure what he just said.
Just to add on to that, and I'm sure Anna caught it and Paul during the premiere, is that it worked. When we saw it at the premiere, people in the audience gasped when they kind of heard him say what he said. And at that point, I was like, yep.
The writer was sitting next to at least one person who was going, what did he say? What did he say? What did he just say? But I mean, you get the intention either way. The threat is there either way. And it's kind of a similar thing to when Bachelor number 2 leans in and warns me about Rodney. You know, we play that on my face, not on his face. So you can't like read his lips, because again, that's Cheryl's experience is like, I think he just warned me about something, but I'm not totally sure, and he's gone now and I can't ask. And yeah, it's all meant to be really kind of disorienting.
Danny's delivery of that line is just so cold and perfect, you know, in this awful way. And then we cut back to his face smiling in that menacing, awful way that he does, you know. I mean, it's just perfect. Yeah.
And I remember early on, there were a couple things that Paul mentioned that we might have to do in ADR. And I just begged him. I was like, can we just work around the clock, please? And one was this tiny nothing thing, but to me it was important, is in the parking lot after he says this thing, and I turn around and I say, what? And I was like, please don't make me try to recreate that. I'm really happy with how that feels, because it feels like I'm about to burst into tears almost. And there was this one car horn that, you know, it's still sort of there, but I was like, oh, it's right there on the thing. But I just was like, it has to be production sound. It just has to. And the same was true of Autumn's big scene toward the end, where I was like, Paul, I'm begging you. And Autumn was fabulous at ADR, but Paul and Tony like really, really killed themselves to be able to keep that production sound, because that performance was so stunning. And, you know, it also, you know, very much to Paul's point, it had to feel like the most isolated, silent place on earth.
Yeah, I mean, after we've experienced Sarah, Charlie's death, and obviously this interaction that you have with Rodney, it just like you don't know when the end is gonna near. Like, you just don't know how much further this story is gonna continue. And I feel like once we get to the parking lot scene, and then obviously we pick up with Amy's story, you know, Joshua Tree, right? It feels to me like, oh my God, thank God this movie's almost over. I can't take anymore, but it keeps going. So.
But it's so good. That's my favorite scene in the movie. I love it.
So okay, I agree, because Autumn Beth, the actress who played Amy,
yes,
like you said, I mean, just my God, what a performance
of a lifetime.
So what can you say about what your experience was on set, and then how did it shape and evolve once you did get to the mixed stage? Like, how did that even become even more?
It was a really brutal environment. We were shooting that in December. And, you know, I made this girl who's, you know, shorter than me, smaller than me. And that's really saying something. I promise you that. You know, in a tank top and like a pair of underwear, lie down in sand that I cannot stress this enough was as cold as any ice rink I've ever touched. You know, before the sun came up in the morning, and asking her to like, you know, deliver the performance of a lifetime, and the performance upon which the entire movie really hangs. And it did feel like she had to be so gentle in her performance, because she's really using every clever, you know, wit and instinct that she has to help herself survive this situation. And she's also kind of seducing him in a way. So that performance had to be so soft and so gentle. And then, you know, we had planes and winds and just, oh my God, it was really wild.
Obviously, I have to mention Jesse Pomeroy, who did an amazing job on the first crack at noise reduction, while maintaining, you know, enough samples for Tony to work with. You know, I gave it a little top off bash just because there was a little bits that were bothering me with aircraft. Still, I could hear remnants of them that I just didn't want anything in there, you know. And yes, I broke Anna's heart by having to record the entire scene in ADR. But Autumn just, I mean, we could put it up side by side, and her performance was, Anna would probably say otherwise, but because she's an actress and she's got that ear for the most minute changes in delivery. But Autumn just knocked it out of the park. I mean, we couldn't believe it, what she was giving us. I mean, it was just astonishing how good the ADR was. But then we got it to the stage, and I explained how, in the pre-dub, I explained to Tony how very important this was to Anna, that we retain production, as was the entire movie. We always tried to retain production wherever we could. But this one in particular was, we needed to go all out, and hats off to Tony. He went all out, and through the magic of mixing, we used tiny bits of ADR where we needed to escape. There was aircraft lingering that just could not be removed, and we, stitched it in and out, and so it became this seamless thing. And I think it ended up very, very good.
When I first saw that scene, I was like, "There's no way we can ADR this. It's so good. It's such a good performance that." I didn't want to get in the way of it by just slapping on the ADR. And then I remember I put in the ADR, I muted the production, and the ADR was so good that I couldn't tell that it was actually like, but I mean, I think the final count was, I never used an entire line. I think we used like little tiny pieces to just like button a sentence because of an airplane or something like that. But I can tell you, like, probably none of my peers could tell what part of that scene is ADR'd, because that's how good she was at matching her performance and pitch and that quiver and the way that she was speaking with like the breathiness and just sort of it was. I turned to you, Anna, and I was just like, where the hell did you find this girl? She is amazing. Like it was just that kind of performance to recreate it. Oh, that's like heart-wrenching to be able to do again. And but yeah, like I remember Anna broke my heart a little bit, because the first time we went through the scene, her first main note was like, let's turn down all the ambiances, let's create more desolation. I was just like, oh no. Now that like I don't want it, because I didn't want to dip into ADR, and luckily our sound effects mixers, both the UC and Maverick, they were able to give me enough in the center channel that I could just retain it all. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful scene at that point of, we never have a ton of ambience to like carry us. I remember Anna having like no cicadas for that whole scene. Let's start to bring them up while they're walking back to the car and things like that. So all I had was light winds. And at that point, it just created that same vibe that we created in the restaurant, where we were just sucking into that little tiny space that they were in with each other. And, as a mixer, especially a dialogue mixer, you run into areas where you need a little crutch of like ambience or anything like that. And this wasn't one of those scenes. And, I loved it. It was like all out. Let's make it work. And I'm so glad that we did it with barely touching the ADR. So yeah, well done.
Just to say to Anna, thank you for being a willing collaborator, because often you directors are going, it's my way or the highway, and you guys are going to listen to me. You're going to do what I say. And Anna was willing to entertain ideas, that we perhaps needed to utilize to make a scene work. And that was very, very refreshing and, ultimately very rewarding because of the end product.
I'll say I feel completely the opposite. I felt fully in such wonderful hands, number one. But also, I think there was something really freeing for me about going into this part of the process, because I think there were areas where I felt like I didn't know as much as I should, but I, knew a little bit. And there's a certain expectation that certain things, particularly around camera, even working with the composers, like you're supposed to know a little bit about music, and that's a tricky area to find yourself in. But, for whatever reason, I just felt like, well, no one really expects me to come in, having this very, very like hyper specific technical point of view. So I got to go, it wasn't like, oh, I did. It was that I got to, go into this with such a beginner's mind and really put myself in good hands. And it meant that we kind of got to do things the wrong way together,
I'm so happy, Anna, that this is the film that you let out with as your directorial debut. I can't wait for what's next from you. I just think you have such a unique voice, both visually and sonically, and obviously what Tony and Paul did to me was not, I didn't expect, I knew, Tony said, this is kind of what the story is about. I said, that's all I want to know. And just as a first time viewer, I hate these types of stories. I just can't watch them. And I couldn't look away, and I'm so excited for people to check this out. It's now streaming on Netflix, so I think for people who haven't had a chance to see it, go check it out. Woman of the Hour. Congratulations, Anna, Paul, Tony. Thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks to our guests today, and if you'd like to listen to more conversations from the SoundWorks Collection, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on all major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube. You can also find exclusive daily video clips on our Instagram and TikTok pages and connect with other creatives around the world through our email industry mailing list at soundworkscollection.com. If you have a story or a project that you want to propose for the show, please send us an email at info@soundworkscollection.com. And thanks again for listening.